everyone. Welcome back. This is a whole new format, a whole new thing. Welcome back to Heart Podcast. Kim and I are joined by a very special guest, Katy Bellote. We are so happy that you're here. Thank you so much for doing this with us, and we look forward to having an amazing conversation.
Yeah, again, as we mentioned, thank you so much, Katy, for being here. Really, the premise of this episode will discuss what role influencers play in pushing social progress in this emerging era of public protest and pushback against various social justice issues. We're really interested in thinking about what does accountability look like for influencers who may do harm or do not use their platforms in ways that are uplifting. So, we're going to touch on a bunch of different topics and ask Katy a lot of different questions since she is an expert in this area.
Maybe. I don't know. I don't speak for all influencers. I speak for me, but I'm going to do my best.
Very true. It's just great to have your influencer, your background knowledge, your insight
Yeah.
at the 411. So thank you for doing this.
I want to say thank you for having me also. I love your podcast, as you know. So I'm so honored to be here with you guys. It's going to be fun.
It's going to be very fun.
Oh, very fun.
We had a really good call last week, and I'm so excited to kind of continue that conversation and continue. That was just like a girl talk conversation.
Oh, yeah.
It felt really good. So we're going to bring this to the viewers. I guess we should start with like our first questions. So our first question was kind of, what do you feel as an influencer is like your responsibility in taking political stances or maybe being vocal? And do you feel like that pressure has increased just with the past few months or this past year in general?
I think, yes, to answer your second question, yes, I think the pressure has increased, but rightfully so. I think the stakes are higher now than they've ever been. I think that this year has brought forth a lot of things a lot of energy, a lot of issues, a lot of things that have just kind of gotten brushed under the rug for the last however many years, hundreds upon hundreds of years. Because now, of course, there's things happening in the political world and policies, things that are on the brink of change, and that scares a lot of people, and so that puts things into motion a lot faster, I think, than other years of our lives. In terms of like influencers' responsibility, I think I've lost a lot of respect for a lot of people this year, and I've unfollowed probably more people this year than I've ever unfollowed in my entire career on the internet, which has been 11 years. And for me, the people that I've lost a little bit respect of, or a lot of bit respect for, and I've unfollowed have been the people that have stayed quiet about things that are just absolutely impossible to stay quiet about. Like there's, to a certain extent, it's not like I need to, do this to look good and whatever. It's like, it's an issue. It's a human issue that I quite literally could not stay quiet about. Like I couldn't if I even wanted to, because there were certain issues that occurred and certain things that I felt passionately about. And it was just so huge that you couldn't ignore it. And people still did, which is just shocking. And we talked about this last week when we chatted, but it more so says a lot about people's privilege. It says a lot about, if you have the privilege to be able to ignore it on your platforms as an influencer and carry on with business as usual and post your clothes and your organic food, that shows your privilege, and that's a huge issue. And I'm happy that those people were called out here and there, and celebrities alike. Like there were certain celebrities and influencers have kind of meshed into this celebrity world these days. It never used to be like that, but now it's to the point where there's certain things you just can't ignore. So I do think it is, if you have the time and the bandwidth to post about your clothes and your food and all these things, like it should be more important than that, of course, but it shouldn't be hard for you to be able to, if you're so good at talking on the internet, you should be able to talk about anything, right? So I'm very passionate about this, as you can tell, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. Yeah, I
Mhm.
think that is really spot on. I think it really does come down to privilege. And I think also just we haven't really seen an era where people are really kind of held to the fire in terms of speaking out and being vocal about these issues. As you mentioned before, these things have been going on for so long. And I
Mhm.
think it's just now during this past summer that, a lot of companies, a lot of influencers, a lot of celebrities are really, receiving demands to speak up because, ultimately your voice does have power. Their voices do have a lot of power. And so it's really great that you recognize those things. Um, And I think one thing that Brie and I talk about a lot is kind of how influencers, go about making this decision of how far do we go in pushing these issues and doing advocacy, and how essentially do you walk this line of taking a stance on issues like Black Lives Matter but also upholding a profitable brand. I think a lot
Mhm.
of people see ascribing to Black Lives Matter or supporting causes such as that as being divisive, as alienating certain audiences. And so we're interested in how
Mhm.
you kind of walk that line.
It is hard. It's definitely hard, especially because a lot of us influencers stumbled into this and we're just trying, we do what we can to do our best. And sometimes we miss the mark. And, there's all those things that we'll talk about probably. But, with walking the line and like what is too much, like I'm also like maybe a different case because I talk about so many things on the internet, whereas some people are very niche and they're like, I'm only doing fashion or I only do food or the various niches that influencers have. I think every person, like how they're going to address it is going to be different across the board. And that is good, honestly. If we're just regurgitating the same message in the same way, like that's not beneficial for anybody. So I think that knowing your audience, knowing your niche and like what you do and how you address things and going along it in that grain. For me, with like my podcast, I talk about a lot about history and a lot of storytelling. That's what I kind of my thing, and that's what I love to do. So I kind of shifted my storytelling over the past year to include more Black and brown people that I just hadn't thought to cover before, and I'm shifting my speech in that way, and it hits people in a different way because it's me. It's less like here's this social media post I'm just going to share in my story and that's all I'm going to do. I'm just going to drop it and say nothing about it, and it's more so using my voice in the way that I know how. And so I think that was kind of hard for influencers to adopt, and not just reposting things and being like, oh, good, thank God, I'm good now. I did my thing. I did what I'm supposed to do. I did something to cover my ass, honestly. And so, I think it's all about learning this year. That's really what it's all been about. But I think in terms of like, what's the line? I don't know if that's the same for everybody, but I do think not talking about it at all is just I just can't even justify it anymore for anybody. Like I can't even look at someone and be like, that's okay for you. It's just not. It's just simply not. And so how you go about it, I think is different for everybody. But I hear people say all the time, like, I don't want to alienate anyone. I don't want anyone to feel that they aren't heard because, of course, with a lot of us, like our communities are safe spaces. Like that's what I want mine to be. I want people to be able to feel like they can talk about things and they can have their opinions that maybe aren't the same as everybody else. But there's certain opinions that I just can't stand for. I just can't. It's just like, it's not like my favorite color is red. Oh, I hate the color red. It's like, it's an issue of human rights. It's an issue of how is our society going to step forward, or are we going to step back? And I just think that staying quiet about that, like even if it's you go about it in your own way and that's fine, but like I just can't justify not talking about it at all. So I think it's been a challenge this year. It's really challenged influencers to figure out, okay, how am I going to address this? Like how am I going to do it that's right for me? And also like, is it even enough what I'm doing? And I think what's been really helpful for me has been having conversations with my followers and reading my DMs, which a lot of people don't like doing because of course there's a lot of hate in there and a lot of bad stuff, but reading my DMs has been probably the way that I've learned best this year, because it's challenged me to see things differently and see that, maybe some of the things I was doing early on when, in the summer when Black Lives Matter, the movement was first beginning kind of in its full speed, maybe there were some things I did that maybe kind of missed the mark. And so, learning and adjusting is really important, I think.
And one thing that you said I wanted to kind of like touch on, I think what a lot of influencers fail to do is synthesize information. I think influencers are very good, and even people that we know, when George Floyd was tragically killed, like when that was everyone, you had to be in an uproar. I think what everyone was really good at doing was reposting infographics and texting us, we feel so bad. We're so sorry that this happened. We're sorry we never thought about like how you must be going through life and what your experience is like. And that was the founding of this podcast. Like that's what our podcast was based on, was quite literally getting those messages and realizing that people were never forced to think about the experiences of Black people. And even you know, in the summer and leading till now, and people are still posting their infographics and reposting little things, I still don't believe that people truly understand the weight of what's going on. And I think that that's one thing I like want to see from influencers do more is, like, people say they're listening and learning, and we see you and we hear you and like all that stuff, but it's like, I need you to like actually read books, and I need you to actually like talk with Black people, and like actually make an effort to have those people in your circles, not just because you feel some social pressure, but because you realize that like you need to just have a cultural experience, like have different people and have different worldviews. You know what I mean? Like, I just think a lot of influencers are doing the bare minimum.
Right. And I also feel like with, you know, reposting things, that's kind of what we've been doing for years, is just reposting things. And that's fine when you're reposting a dress you think is cute, or when you're reposting a quote that's cute and bubbly and amazing. But when it's an issue of a human life lost, you need to talk about it. And it doesn't even need to be like you're writing a novel, or you just need to say like, here's my view on it maybe. And then also like, here's what I'm doing about it. Like, here's how I'm educating myself, not just like I'm listening and learning, because that just really doesn't mean anything. It's just kind of a filler unless you're actually putting your money where your mouth is, sort of thing. So I agree.
I guess we should move on to another question. That was a really good. This is
Yeah.
loving the flow. How much weight do you think you have in shaping public opinion on social and human rights issues?
I mean, I'm also like the biggest queen of imposter syndrome. So I always feel like no one cares about me. It's the worst. Like, that's a whole like another thing. Like, I always feel like, oh, like, you know, I have this many followers and there's people with millions, and like that's just me being like critical of myself. But I do want to say that I definitely have a lot of more influence than I ever think I do. Like, there's certain things that, like, you know, I'll see someone DM me something and I'm like, really? Like, you did that because I said, you know. And I think as influencers, a lot of us feel this imposter syndrome where we feel like our voice doesn't really matter very much. And that's a problem like for the industry as a whole. But I think that it's important that we don't let that get in the way of us spreading really important messages and urging change in policy making and things like that. So I do think I have more than I think I do. And I think a lot of us influencers should know that.
Yeah, I think that's really, really important. I think Brie and I talk about that all the time.
Mhm.
I think even within our own audience and, you know, in some of the work that we've done through our podcast, but also to just speaking out on Instagram and, you know, posting the infographic, but then also adding opinions and adding synthesis to what's being said. We've had so many different conversations with so many people who have, you know, DM'd us or texted us, you know, asking about more information. And I think just to see our own individual strides to, you know, push people to think differently and seeing how far that's gone, you know, we kind of just, you know, look and see a lot of influencers and we could just imagine like what is possible. And I think also something that's really important and something that, you know, I think about a lot is that, you know, for people who don't identify as Black or as some of these other marginalized groups, when you know, push these ideas and when you talk about these issues, it's going to come from a different place and people are going to be more receptive to listening to you rather than other people they might have developed, you know, all of these different perceptions about. And so we also see so much power in somebody who looks completely like opposite of us, completely different from us, you know, taking a stance on these issues because it means a lot. And it's something that, you know, us as individuals, us as like Black people will never really be able to do.
Yeah. I mean, if you also have to think about the domino effect of even just one conversation. Like, even just, I mean, I think about it just having one DM exchange. Like, if I wasn't an influencer and I had never made the decision to start my channel in 2009, and like, if I had done all these things, like I hadn't done this, and that conversation didn't happen, like maybe one person's mind wouldn't have been changed, which would, you know, you think about people grow old and they have kids. And then, you know, the kids are the generations that are continuously putting us backwards because the parents are feeding them information that they got when they were kids. And it's never, if the conversations aren't going to change, nothing's going to change. So I think you have to think about the magnitude of even just one DM exchange. Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I think our next question is something that we talked about before, but just going off of influence, I know the big thing right now is how influencers are communicating with their audiences about COVID and COVID safety and how your platform can maybe like influence people in that
Mhm.
sense. Do you have any comments about that? I know that that's kind of something that you might have thoughts on.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, it's just this is I'm going to say what everyone always says. This has been a crazy year, but it's true, and I think influencers are being pushed more than we ever have in a very good way to be like hold ourselves accountable for things and be held accountable for when we mess up. And it's not, I've been on the internet for 11 years. So I've messed up in so many different ways. I've said like so many things and, I speak from my mind. And sometimes people are like, I talk a lot about like psychology and like things on my platforms and people will DM me and say, Katy, here's all the reasons why everything you said was wrong. And like, we'll have a conversation about that. And like, and there's certain ways that like psychology or me maybe like talking about there's like the sustainability conversation I always have. Like, am I being sustainable enough? Am I supporting fast fashion? Like, there's so many things that I'm being, pushed to do better with throughout a year. And all of those things are fine. And I'm definitely working on those. But when it comes down to things that are affecting real human lives, like that is where I'm like, I really need, and all influencers should really listen. Because, of course, there's the concept of like, cancel culture and people are or cancel yeah I think that's what it's called, cancel culture. And when people are like influencers are crying on their Instagram story because they're being held accountable for things and like it's really hard to be an influencer, but with all the things that this industry like gives me, like it makes sense that there are ways where I need to be held accountable for all of the beautiful things that and all of the just the privileges that this industry gives me. And one of those things is COVID leading to that. And it's been really tricky for me just navigating things because of course I mean it's an issue that brings forth a lot of emotions naturally because it is quite literally taking human lives like before our eyes, and it's not a mystery, it's not a secret anymore. We all know exactly what causes it. Well, in the sense of like, staying inside helps it, and there's certain ways that you can stop the spread, and we know those things better now. Wear a mask. In the beginning they were saying don't wear a mask at first. Like I remember those days, they're like don't wear a mask, it's less sanitary, and then they're like oh wait, psych, wear a mask. So things do change every day, and in that sense, like we as influencers need to change our ways as well. And we aren't above the rules. And I've said this before, and I've broken the rules, and I can admit that. And I've learned, I really have. And the way that I have is people holding me accountable via social media, which has been something that I can say, that maybe other people not in the public light don't necessarily get. They can do things repetitively that are bad, hence like having gatherings or going traveling places unnecessarily and all these things, and they aren't held accountable for them. And do I feel a little bit of like darn, I wish I wasn't an influencer sometimes? Like of course, because like people are poking and prodding and saying like oh like here's you and your friend's story and all these things. And I get angry about those things, but then I stop myself, I check myself, I'm like why am I getting angry about this? I'm literally breaking a rule. I'm getting angry because I got caught. I'm getting angry because, and then you think about all those ugly emotions that I feel when I'm like, darn, like I'm an influencer. Like, and I stop myself and I'm like, whoa, that like I let my human creep in a little too much right there because like I don't like why is it so necessary? Like yes, it's a year that's been really sucky for a lot of people because we haven't been able to live our lives to the full, which is apparently a human right that we've all decided is something we get. But when it comes to when we're losing lives, we need to be careful. And for me, I've broken rules and I've apologized, and then I've broken more rules, and it's come down to me having a long, hard looking conversation with myself and several very hard conversations with friends of mine, which has been really hard because you think, oh, like, my friends say it's okay. So, and my friends are everything to me, but they're not always right. And I'm not always right. And so I guess what I'm trying to say here is, things have happened this year that I'm not proud of. And all you can really do in that situation, like things have been done and people have been upset, and you figure yourself out so you don't do it again. Like that's the most important thing. And it's not, sometimes, influencers are very quick to defend themselves and be like, oh, but like, no, you can't do that. You can't defend yourself when you know you're wrong. And I think the worst thing you can do besides disappoint other people is disappoint yourself. And I've done that a few times, and what I've done essentially is just learned how to not do that anymore. And what works for me might not work for other people, but what works for me is physically distancing myself from temptation. And so that is why I've spent several months here with my family in Maryland doing a lot of nothing. But it's good for me because I know when I'm surrounded by, it's really hard when your friends are like, oh, we're going to this birthday party. And like, it's really tough. And people don't like cover like how tough it is to say no to things like that. And it sounds so superficial. And admitting this makes me feel like a terrible person. But it's like, it's life. And it's something where if we don't talk about it, people are going to continue to do it. So, yeah. And with COVID, especially, just it's always tough as an influencer to have to talk about things like that because you don't want to be wrong. And there's so many things we don't know about this. It is pretty mysterious an illness, even though we do know a lot now. And so what I've been striving to do as an influencer is just do my best. And this is a Maya Angelou quote that I was talking to you guys about last week. It's like my favorite quote ever. It's, do your best and until you know better. And then when you know better, you do better. And that's kind of what I've been doing. I think a lot of us have made mistakes this year, not all of us, but a lot of us. And a lot of people will continue to. And it's the way that we view those things and we regroup. So that is my full statement, like 30 minutes later.
No, thank you so much. I mean, that's such a candid answer. And
Yeah.
thank you for sharing that with us. And I know there's probably going to be so many listeners who really appreciate that answer and appreciate your honesty because we don't see a lot of honesty, especially surrounding COVID.
Mhm.
It's clear when influencers are not posting at a certain time, or it's a Friday night, Friday, Saturday night, and you went 2 days without vlogging. Like, we can put the pieces together there. But thank you so much for that, answer. And definitely it's hard. COVID is hard on everyone. And I'm sure living in beautiful LA, there's temptation. And
More than you'll ever know. I like more than I ever experienced in New York. And I was like, it's just such a different culture out there that I was just not even expecting. So
yeah,
yes,
and that might be
it's
that, yeah,
tough.
especially just moving there, you're probably like wanting to go full speed, but obviously
Yeah.
it doesn't allow that right now.
Right. Exactly. And you need to, it's easy, I think, some days to wake up and be like, I don't want COVID to exist anymore. So I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist. And that's a lot of people's coping mechanism. And we like it's forgivable only because like this is a trauma that we're all going through. And like more so there's more groups than others, or some groups more than others. But you can't be like that when lives are at risk.
And I think one thing too, that is really just, I think, interesting, and I think something that a lot of people don't recognize, but like Katie, I definitely see that this is something that you recognize, is also too that a lot of people just went through this whole entire time period of supporting Black Lives Matter and trying to be an ally and trying to learn, and then they are not following guidelines concerning an illness that is disproportionately like killing Black and brown people. And I just think that's really something important to point out, and I think something that a lot of people don't recognize. um, and I am really happy for you to be coming on here and really sharing that, yes, I make mistakes. I think a lot of people also fear like the profitability of their brand and the profitability of their everything they've developed on their social media platforms when making those statements. But I think ultimately what you're doing on here is really important, and I really hope that what you're saying could serve as almost an example or like a basis for how other influencers are thinking about their own actions and thinking about the longevity of their allyship, the longevity of their commitment to social progress and the commitment to human rights. Because I think it does exist in little things like, if you're following COVID guidelines, because it could have an
Mhm.
effect on, people's lives.
Right. And it's not just another trend, just being conscious of other people, especially marginalized groups of people. It's not a trend that we're following. And I know a lot of influencers, a lot of people also, not just influencers, because influencers are, but everybody. I think it will kind of, unfortunately, for a lot of people, be a trend. And that's really sad. So we need to make sure that we don't let that happen, I think. And as an influencer, like it baffles me also. It's just like, if you have an audience, why wouldn't you use it? Like, you have this gift to be able to spread messages at such a high rate because you have all these people, all these eyeballs, like these tens of thousands of people watching your Instagram story. Is it really going to hurt you to just post a few frames of you voicing something you care about that would really help other people. Like, yeah. So I agree.
I think a lot of influencers want to have their cake and eat it too. They want all the benefits of, being an influencer, which is all the PR lists and all the followers and all the free clothes and all the free this and all the free that. But they don't want the weight and the responsibility that comes with having those followers. And I think, like, as you said, I know when you went into this, you didn't think of like maybe the negative things that would come with this or the weight and the responsibility. And I'm sure most people don't really take that into account, but it's like at a certain point, you guys are all grown and you're all adults.
Right. No, I love when I hear that. I love hate it actually.
Yeah.
Like I say I love it because it's like hilarious when people are like, oh, like I'm an influencer, but I never signed up for this. People follow me, but I never signed up. At some point you saw the followers trickling in and you kept doing your thing. You could have been like, okay, and there are a lot of people on the internet, like on YouTube in the early days when I started in like 2010, that I'm sure you guys, even if you were interested in YouTube at the time, like saw certain people just drop off the map and like never make videos again. And those people were like, this is a lot. I'm not doing this. But if you knowingly like keep posting, keep working with brands, keep literally doing everything to be this influencer type person, like you can't say it's not something that you signed up for, because in a way, like it really is. If you really didn't like it anymore or don't want this life, then don't do it. So yeah, it's not as easy as that. I really don't. And I think I do want to say, I think a reason that a lot of influencers hold back also is because it's uncomfortable to talk about things that you don't know exactly maybe how to talk about in the right way. And it takes education to do that. It takes reading the books and listening to the podcasts and talking to people who live these traumas and these things. And I think that putting in the work is really hard for people, because of course it's like, well, what about all the things that I want to do, like, go shopping and all the things. And there's certain things where you need to dedicate time to being a more educated person. And then after that, it'll be like so easy for you to talk about things. So that's not even an excuse either. I've talked to friends of mine, influencer friends of mine, who are like, Katy, I'm just afraid of saying the wrong thing. And I'm like, you might say the wrong thing, but you also might say a million other really right things, really great things. And ultimately your followers really listen to you. And so, that should not hold you back, that fear of saying the wrong thing, because I've said a million wrong things, but like it's the right things you say that really impact people.
I agree.
So
I agree. I think that time of fear, and honestly, if you're uncomfortable, I think you're doing something right. I think people assume they're always going to be comfortable, but if you're comfortable, you're never going to grow, you're never going to learn. And I think it's time that people stop stunting their own growth by saying how fearful they are of talking about something. We're all scared of different topics, but at some point you have to put your big girl pants on and learn about these topics.
Amen to that.
And Brie and I always talk about how, obviously it's difficult to talk about these things, but even for us, it's extremely difficult to be somebody who's like living these experiences and, sharing our stories, sharing our traumas, and not sure how people are going to perceive it. I don't even think Brie and I could be talking about things in the capacity that we do, like, 3-4 years ago, because of just how the world operated. And even now, it's still we still sometimes get a little bit of pushback for like what we say, and people questioning our experiences and the stories that we're putting out. And so I think also too, again, it comes back to that privilege as well. It's one thing to like read a book and to learn these things, which does take time, and that is something that's great, but it's a whole nother thing to live these experiences, find the right words to say, and then like share it with the world.
That's so true. Cause I mean, yeah, the amount of discomfort that a white person like me feels talking about it to my followers, or that sort of, getting the messages of pushback and having to have hard conversations, like that pain, the even sliver of pain that I feel, or like discomfort that I feel, like it's a drop in the bucket to the pain that people like you guys and, other oh my God, am I back?
Yes.
Yeah,
Oh, you know what? There was a huge gust of wind and I'm like, oh no, I feel like I'm going to lose them.
that's right. Yeah, it was like 30 seconds.
Moral of the story I was going to say was like, that the pain that I feel as a white person talking about this can't even like equate even in the slightest. It's a drop in the bucket to what you guys must feel sharing your experiences as people that live this. You know, we can only begin as people, white people in this country can only begin to understand. And even then, it's like, it's not, yeah, we have years to go, honestly. It's a challenge. It's a challenge. It's not something that you can just be like, oh, you know, here I am, like a fully non-racist person in the slightest, because it's so much bigger. So yeah.
Definitely.
Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
That was such a good everything. I love this conversation. I'm so happy.
Me too. It's so good to talk about this with you guys. I really think, like, I mean, I listen to your podcast all the time and I love hearing what you guys have to say, but like having a nice chat like this, oh, it feels good. It feels like we're getting somewhere.
Yeah, it feels refreshing.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely. I hope that more people are willing to have these conversations. And I think that we might have done something big here and we might have really opened up a really wide conversation and save space for people to feel like they can talk about a lot of things that we just talked about, whether it's COVID responsibility or Black Lives Matter, all of those things. I think that people have a duty to talk about these things, whether you have 100 followers or 100,000 or a million. We all need to have an open discourse and create safe
Mm-hmm.
spaces. And I think that we just did that here. So thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, guys. You guys are great.
Yeah, thank you so much. We're really looking forward to seeing the response from this. And as Ria shared, this is, I think, really the start of thinking about how the internet community needs to, they're really a part of this movement. And it's just a matter at this point of how people decide to go forward, the strategy that people decide to employ, and kind of the sacrifices that we're all willing to make, to make everyone more equal. So
yeah. And Kim and I, one final thing, but Kim and I, we've talked about this before, just like if more influencers get over the fear of also being seen as profitable, I think that brands will have to adjust to you guys. And what may not be profitable now, brands will just be forced to have to accept your views and accept maybe what might have been radical in the past. But that was just another thing I was thinking about.
That's such a good point. That's so true. I mean, I've even seen it just from working with brands, like on my end. Like, I have a hard time believing that brands will even want to work with people who don't express their views at this point, because people want like loud, crazy influencers, because those are typically, those people have a very devoted following, because when you talk about things that that go deeper than just your clothes and your food, people, it opens up a door of trust. People really, like, I lost trust as a follower to some of my favorite influencers through this, because I feel like they don't, like, I don't even know them. Like, I'm like, I don't even know you. I thought I did. And so I think brands want the influencers who have a community that trusts them. And you garnering trust takes giving your feelings, giving your full, like, here's how you feel about this, and it might not be popular. So I think that brands will have to pivot, and it's really good.
Yeah, I definitely think you guys can push the needle forward and we can all just keep progressing in this online community. But thank you so much. We don't want to keep you for too much longer.
Oh, I could talk to you guys forever. But thank you. I know you guys have very busy lives too.
We definitely want to do this again sometime. But thank you so much. And we'll see you all next week. Thank you, listeners, for listening. We hope you guys enjoyed. And we'll see you next Sunday.
bye. Thank you, Katie.
No problem.
Bye.